Hi, everyone. Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Today is Friday, June 21st, 2024. It's the end of the week. It's the end of the day. It's a happy time for all of us. It's our wrap on what has happened during the week with my two dear friends and collaborators, Ray McGovern and Larry Johnson. We have a lot to discuss. I want to start right off the top with Russia and North Korea. Ray, to you first. How significant is this geopolitically? How embarrassed was the State Department by this? How shrewd a move on the part of Vladimir Putin was this?
Pretty shrewd. I was talking to someone who should have known better. He said, wait a second now. Russia has lots of alliances, for God's sake. I said, like what? This is the only defense alliance that Russia has with North Korea, mind you. Now, there's a very close relationship with China, of course, but this is a mutual defense agreement here. So it's a very smart move. And people are wondering, well, what did Putin mean in doing this kind of symmetrical or asymmetrical move to warn the U.S. and the West specifically that, look, you can play around in Europe, but if you strike our territory, if you go to war with us in the West, well, we have a mutual defense treaty now with an armed to the teeth, million-man army North Korea, who also have very sophisticated missilery that can attack not only neighboring countries, Japan, South Korea, and so forth, but the United States itself. Last thing I'll add here is that, as you know, Judge, and our audience knows, since we've been telling this story for 11 months now, the Russians gave the North Koreans a very sophisticated missile. It's their next to the most sophisticated. It's called a Topol M. The North Koreans call it Xiang 18, and it is capable of reaching every inch of the United States with all manner of decoys, all manner of chaff. It's very, very sophisticated, and worst of all, from the U.S. point of view, it's mobile. Okay, solid fuel makes it mobile, so they can hide behind trees. They can't be identified in photography or any other space. Well, they can presumably be, but it's very, very difficult. So they were given this more than a year ago because they test fired it twice. The last test firing was July 16th of last year. Now, nobody took notice of this except Ted Postal, former professor at MIT, former briefer of the chief of naval intelligence. And what he said was, look, this is big news. And even though it was published, his study in the very prestigious CSIS, the Center for Strategic and International Studies, in July, after the test firing, it was not noticed until about August, and then NBC had a little thing. And then Jake Sullivan was asked about it at a press conference. Mr. Sullivan, what do you think about that? Oh, we know about that. He said, we'll farm that out to the intelligence people to tell us what to think about that. Well, it doesn't appear that President Biden has been briefed on this. He needs to be, because it's not a matter of what Moscow might give North Korea now. It's a matter of what they've already given them and what more is to come.
Larry, I'm going to suggest that Moscow is also going to give them technical know-how, probably in the form of human beings that will teach them how to use this. What kind of headaches is this giving the State Department and the Defense Department?
Well, it's one more factor in their military planning that they have to consider. Right now in their various scenarios about going to war with China. So they can't discount the possibility of North Korea getting engaged and then having a much wider war. Again, you can't even begin to try to explain the logic and behind this desire to go to war with China in light of the other tensions that exist. What's important about North Korea, and it's the same for Iran, it's the same for Cuba. Here are three states that the United States has been sanctioning for years: economic sanctions, political sanctions. And what has that accomplished? Nothing, other than maybe causing some pain and suffering for the various peoples of those countries.
It certainly
But,
generated a lot of animosity against the United States.
well, yeah, that coupled with you think that the purpose of sanctions is somehow to force a change in a government, force a change in its policy.
It never does.
Well, it hasn't accomplished that at all. And then, you know, the West doubles down with Russia 2 years ago, imposes sanctions on it. And lo and behold, Russia forges closer ties with China, now with North Korea, and with Vietnam. You know, look for the Russians to go back into Cam Bay, which at one time was a major Soviet naval base. And then the United States took it over during the Vietnam War. It could definitely revert back to a major Russian naval base there in the Pacific region. So, I mean, this entire, I'll call it the North Korea drama, is a reminder that at least when Trump was in there, he saw the value in trying to talk to Kim Jong-un. And, you know, the world was somewhat fixated on his, you know, let's call them feeble attempts. It was not anywhere near what happened when Putin arrived on scene, greeted with great fanfare, with his pictures plastered all over the streets, being celebrated, being applauded. But it's a reminder that up to this point, the United States has been a failure on the policy front. Instead of trying to figure out how can we forge positive relationships with other countries, instead we're gonna impose sanctions on them, try to bully them, and that hasn't worked out.
Do you agree, Larry, with Ray that the North Koreans can reach Los Angeles, and if so, can they reach New York?
Yeah. I'm sure about Los Angeles. I'm not sure about the range of the missile for New York, but you know, once you hit the West Coast, does it matter? You know,
no, I guess it doesn't matter. How sophisticated are these missiles, Ray McGovern?
They're incredibly sophisticated. They have chaff, they have decoys, they have maneuverability, which was demonstrated in the last test. In other words, you can wiggle it around, you can avoid detection, and you can avoid interception. So this Topol M, which is what the Russians called it, is highly sophisticated. And the big rub, of course, is that it cannot be so easily detected. I mean, liquid fuel missiles, they have about 5 or 6 fuel trucks following it before they get loaded to launch. Mobile ones have solid fuel. They cannot be detected. They're road mobile. They hide behind trees.
Larry, what is the message that Vladimir Putin is sending to Joe Biden by this deal with North Korea?
It's called horizontal escalation. So what he's demonstrating is, okay, you want to target us in our country? We're going to create some additional problems for you. We're going to back the North Koreans. We're going to take them out of their economic isolation. I wouldn't be surprised to see North Korea brought into BRICS. That would be sort of the next, example of Russia and China flipping the middle finger to Joe Biden and team. So by bringing North Korea into that, to try to integrate it into this multipolar economy that sits outside of the G7. And in doing this, Putin is reminding the United States that Russia has plenty of room to escalate. And he doubled down by going to Vietnam, because Russia, the truth of the Vietnam War is that it was Russia, not China, that played a critical role in helping Vietnam stand up to and defeat the United States.
The McGregor reports, Ray, that by the United States announcing and following through on its announcement that offensive weaponry is moving to the head of the line going to Ukraine, we are gravely depleting supplies that we may need here if, God forbid, we are involved in a war. Why this danger? Why allowing this to happen? Does the Pentagon not know, not understand how low our supplies are? Example, the Russian munitions factories work 24/7. Ours stop at 5 o'clock in the afternoon.
Judge, the main lesson to be drawn from that, in my view, is that the United States military feels no threat from either Russia or China or North Korea or anybody. In other words, the war was over when the Soviet Union fell apart, right? And that's why you have no 155 millimeter shells to provide. That's why you have no artillery left. But what you have left, you don't need it. Give it to the Ukrainians. Maybe they could prolong this thing to get you safely by November and the presidential election. That's what the game is all about. This is not gonna turn the tide. It may prolong it. It depends on Putin, what he tries to do here. He's pretty much laid down a marker and said, these are my terms. The next time, the terms are not going to be so favorable for you. And there is favorable room in those terms. But the question is, these folks in Washington do not want to negotiate. And that's the fly in the ointment. In other words, the reason this thing continues is the United States and its allies, so to speak, UK and so forth. They want to keep it going, at least so these elections are gotten by without definitive defeat on the part of Democrats, for example, here and in Europe, the wiping of the faces of the people who are responsible for the disaster that has occurred to Europe since the war began.
Larry, the American defense budget is $880 billion. It's more than the next 10 countries combined, which of course includes Russia and China. And we are running dangerously low on weaponry we might need to defend ourselves. I don't get it. Every time Joe Biden sends another tranche of a few billion to Ukraine, isn't that money going to the military industrial complex? And aren't they manufacturing what we need?
Yes, it's going, and no, they're not manufacturing. So it's a yes and no situation.
Please explain how this works.
So the money is allocated, and but the problem is these companies don't have the actual industrial base to produce it. Lockheed Martin, for example, is churning out, I think, 250 Patriot missiles a month. And, it sounds like a lot, except once you realize that I think each Patriot missile launcher will fire off 16 at a time. All you got to do is, if you launch that 10 times, you're already over halfway depleted. And, the pace of fire for Ukraine, frankly, outpaces everything that the West can produce with artillery shells and with HIMARS and with ATACMS, down the road. What's fascinating is this last week, Zelensky said, hey, we just need another, and listen to me carefully, $800 billion, and we can beat those Russians.
Wow.
And you're going, that's the size of our current, that's almost the size of our current defense allocation.
From whom did he ask for $800 billion?
The United States. You put that out. That's what we need, $800 billion. That'll fix the problem.
Before we jump over to Israel, Larry, how much longer can the war in Ukraine last, no matter what we send them?
That's up to the Russians. The Russians right now seem content to attrit the Ukrainians. They moved into the Kharkiv area, but now they've stopped. They've dug in, and the Ukrainians are throwing themselves at these fortified lines. And in the process, the Russians are inflicting up to 2,000 casualties a day. Well, that's well over brigade size. And so when you look at that every single day over the last 2 weeks, particularly, and going to continue, It is a level of attrition that is, from Ukraine's standpoint, irrecoverable. They don't have any way to dig themselves out of that hole. I don't care how many people they recruit and drag to the recruiting centers. Just from a time standpoint of time required to adequately train personnel and then deploy them to the field, Ukraine can't sustain this. And I think Russia's going to continue it to a point. Then they're going to decide, okay, now we're going, and I suspect they'll launch a massive offensive down further south. They're going to use Kharkiv to tie down some of the top units of Ukrainians. But I think this thing will be over by the end of summer.
Wow. Ray, we'll transition over to Netanyahu and his woes. I learned this week that the prime minister of Israel is not the commander-in-chief of the IDF. I learned this when the IDF announced what we have all been saying, that Hamas is an idea and it cannot be defeated. Netanyahu challenged that, and they stood firm on what they were saying. Do you think the Israeli people understand that Hamas cannot be defeated and that it's time for Netanyahu to go?
Judge, the Israeli people are kind of viciously vindictive. They want to get rid of not only Hamas, but the Palestinians. The polls still show that a vast majority, 68% was the last one, want to get rid of all the Palestinians in Gaza. So this is the reality with which Netanyahu can rule. And this is the reality that the leaders there sort of respect and exploit. So the military speaks, it seems to me, with forked tongue. They'll say, well, we can't do this. Oh, yes, we can. But the reality is that the military keeps killing people in Gaza. And my fear is they'll be so full of hubris that they'll go up against Hezbollah in Lebanon, and they'll get another bloody nose. How long this can continue? Well, I think I do know the answer to that. It continues until the U.S. says stop, or else we will not provide any more weapons to you. That's how long it will continue, and the Palestinians will bear the brunt of this, and they're close to being, well, they're on their way to being extinguished as a people here as we speak.
Larry, Colonel McGregor and Scott Ritter, without mentioning Ray by name, say that a bloody nose is charitable to describe what Hezbollah will do to Israel. And we're going to show you this. Chris, if you want to show it now, we have this video taken by a Hezbollah drone, which showed remarkable detail of Israeli infrastructure. They flew this drone. There are areas that they've blocked out, but they flew this drone all over Israeli cities, and it sent up to the cloud all this technical information. It must terrify Netanyahu. So the bottom line is, wouldn't Netanyahu be crazy in light of history and in light of what we know is the strength of Hezbollah, in light of what we know is the promises from Iran, the agreement between Iran and Russia? Wouldn't he be crazy, no matter what Amos Hochstein says, to attempt to take Hezbollah on?
Well, yes, if he was rational. But what happened with the dissolution of the war cabinet? The war cabinet was made up of some opposition political figures.
Right.
They actually put a break on some of the crazier notions that the other members of Netanyahu's cabinet had. But because this war cabinet was set up, the regular Netanyahu cabinet did not have the authority to weigh in. Now they do. So with that war cabinet gone, the existing cabinet with Benjamin or Itamar Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, all of a sudden those guys now have a say. They're sitting at the table. They get to have a vote, and they're pressing for a full-scale offensive against Hezbollah. I have heard from two other people who are well connected to the Israeli defense establishment that Israel is telling them we're going in and we're going to deliver a they believe their own press clippings. They're going to deliver a devastating blow. Short of using tactical nukes, which I know that Doug McGregor has pointed out is one possible scenario of Israel going after Hezbollah. If they don't use tactical nukes, then the odds are extremely high that Hezbollah is going to launch an offensive that's not just a bloody nose. It's going to destroy significant portions of the Israeli military, its infrastructure, and make cities almost uninhabitable. It's going to be something that Israel has never experienced, and because they completely underestimate Hezbollah, and Hezbollah up to this point has been sort of pulling its punches. Yet, despite exercising some restraint, they've steadily encroached in the north. They've forced the Israelis to evacuate large swaths of people from the north. At least over 100,000 are now sitting in hotels somewhere in the south. So this thing, we're heading towards an escalation that's going to really ramp things up in a way that they could, easily get out of control.
Ray, in your view, is the key to what Larry just said the word rational, that the Israeli government will now be motivated by religious and cultural goals as opposed to rationally achievable military goals?
I would add, Judge, to rational or irrational, I would add personal. And we all know what happens to Netanyahu if he loses his job.
Right.
Probably end up in jail, okay? They have the goods against him. And maybe I'll just raise one more time the analogy I often use. They have the goods against not only Hunter Biden, but Joe Biden himself. So there's a personal stake involved in both of these situations. That's why, in my view, the Israelis will keep doing what they're doing. And that's why, in my view, I am very afraid that these sophomores around Biden will say, well, now, we violated all our red lines so far. We've given everything that we said we wouldn't. We'll give them F-16s. Let's see if we give them a little mini nuke there. And that scared the hell out of Russia. Said, hold them at bay until November, and we have a decent chance of winning the election. I do not rule that out. These deep personal reasons very often continue, very seldom end wars.
Larry, to what extent will the United States, Amos Hochstein made this a statement earlier today, but he didn't give any details, that the U.S. would back Israel in a war against Hezbollah. To what extent would they? Are we talking about 100,000 soldiers on the ground? Are we talking about 2,000 Marines? Are we talking about the U.S. Navy from, a safe distance away?
Well, the U.S. doesn't have 100,000 soldiers sitting in that break in case of fire or emergency glass case. They can't just hit it and then all of a sudden magically deploy them. What the United States can do is apply air power. Of course, we see how effective that's been against the Houthis. The Houthis are still going here 7 months after sustained bombing campaigns by the United States and the United Kingdom. They can also deploy naval task force off the coast and start shelling into the interior of Lebanon. We call that deja vu all over again, reminding us of what happened back in 1982-83 when Reagan, then President Reagan, ordered the U.S. Navy to start shelling Hezbollah positions in the Bekaa Valley. And lo and behold, Hezbollah, in league with Iran, struck the U.S. Marine barracks in Beirut, I believe it was in April, along with the French barracks, killed French and U.S. Marines, and then later in October, hit the U.S. Embassy in Beirut. So it was after that, after the United States started paying a price in blood, that Reagan went, this is not such a good idea, and he pulled us out. He pulled the naval forces out. But naval force, air power, any troop deployment would be inconsequential. All it would do is get a bunch of U.S. soldiers killed without the ability to sustain them in the field.
Wow. I had an interesting conversation with Colonel Larry Wilkerson earlier today, and we got off a little bit on a tangent, and I thought I would raise it with the two of you. Douglas Feith, who apparently was somebody that Larry Wilkerson didn't get along with,
Well,
said
it
that
speaks well of Larry.
Right. Feith brought Mossad agents into the Pentagon, and they did not have to be frisked or go through any kind of magnetometers, which Larry says is absolutely unheard of. Does this type of thing happen? A political appointee so dedicated to the ideology of a foreign country that he will admit their agents into the heart of the Pentagon armed?
Well, that's what happened. And I know exactly where Larry learned about that. It was from one of your other guests, Karen Katowski. She was sitting right across from the room where these people came in without signing in, without having to bow to any of the usual procedures. So she reported that actually there's a really good movie made about that, Shock and Awe by Rob Reiner. Now, Karen reported all that, and there are all kinds of other indications. Some of them, well, here's one. When you're briefing Douglas Feith, okay, you don't say West Bank. You don't say, my God, you don't say occupied territories. You have to say Judea and Samaria. Can you believe it? Now, at least they didn't require that to be written down in the PDB. But Feith was one of the
Larry,
people.
is he another one with dual citizenship like Hochstein?
Yeah, he is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know, but Ray seems to know.
Yeah, he is.
But remember, Feith was there with Paul Wolfowitz. Wolfowitz, I know. Wolfowitz was the deputy assistant secretary, and again, a hardened Zionist and neoconservative, and so Wolfowitz was a big advocate of saying, "Hey, let's go into Iraq. It'll pay for itself with the oil." That turned out not to be true.
Wow. All right, guys. Thank you for filling me, and thank you for the tip on Karen. I'll ask her about that when she's on with us next week. I did not know she was in the room. I can imagine how she must have reacted, knowing the way she thinks. Appreciate your time. I deeply appreciate the second hit, but these are so much fun. Maybe because it's Friday afternoon and now it's summertime, we all want to get the hell out of here. All the best. We'll see you on Monday, guys. Thank you very much. Have a great
Thanks,
week.
Judge.
Thank you.
Good weekend, Judge.
Of course. All of your regulars and all of your favorites will be with us next week. Judge Napolitano for Judging Freedom.